Hello and welcome to the Nexus Reloaded. There have been some big developments in the stories we've covered so far this year. First up, no limits. China's leader can now run for president as many times as he likes, so he'll probably outlast Trump. But what about China's military? Could it soon outgun America? Also ahead, the NRA's political firepower. Will the world's most powerful gun lobby continue to get its way in Washington? Another 6-year term for President Vladimir Putin. How does he keep on winning? And finally, Nexus goes viral, but which foul-mouthed leader got us 2 million views? We'll have that report and more coming up right now in the Nexus. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Matthew Moore. It is a busy show today, 4 topics instead of the usual one. We're going to be beginning in China. Now, earlier this year, we speculated that China would remove the term limits on presidents, and lo and behold, they have. So President Xi can now run as many times as he wants, and frankly, Xi looks likely to be leader a very long time. Meanwhile, America's President Donald Trump, well, he's announced massive new tariffs on Chinese goods, hoping to bring down his country's deficit with China. Some experts are predicting a trade war, but what about the real thing? Is China's military a match for America's?
China.
Imagine an arcade game called World Superpowers, with each character having their strengths and weaknesses.
Round 1, fight!
Well, President Xi controls the 3rd most powerful military in the world, behind the United States and Russia. While China's 2nd or 3rd in many areas, in manpower it's number 1. 2.26 million active personnel, dwarfing America with just 1.3. But China's still playing catch-up to the United States in most other areas.
Round 2, fight!
For example, America has far more fighter jets than China, and 19 all-powerful aircraft carriers to China's 1.
Round 3, fight!
Then there's the ultimate game changer, nukes. The US has 6,800 warheads to China's 270.
You lose!
Both countries, of course, have their spheres of influence. The US has soldiers stationed all over the world, particularly in Europe, South Korea and Japan. By comparison, China finally set up its first overseas base in 2017 in Djibouti. The number of soldiers stationed there, unknown. But where could there be tension and overlap of influence? Well, the South China Sea seems a good bet. China claims almost all of it, building artificial islands to make sure everyone knows who's boss. The US and its allies don't recognize these claims. Well, that may work while America has the supreme military, but China's catching up fast by increasing its military spending every year for the last 2 decades. In 2000, it spent just $14 billion. 10 years later, $123 billion. And now, that figure has doubled to $250 billion. While that's still less than half of what the United States spends, $600 billion, China's military is clearly closing in fast.
So let me come to you then, Dennis. Since it's your speciality, why keep ratcheting up spending if you don't want to be the biggest and the best?
Well, what they want is primacy in East Asia. So the Chinese aren't trying to be a global power like the United States, where the United States projects power all over the world. What China wants to do is control the East China Sea, South China Sea. They want to control out to what they call the 2nd or 3rd island chain. What they want to do basically is back up the American forward presence in East Asia, move us away from their coastal areas, move us out. And as Xi Jinping says, the Pacific is big enough for both of us.
Really?
The American concern is that the Chinese want to divide up the Pacific and keep us out of certain places.
Just really briefly, do you think ultimately there could be conflict there? We had that US aircraft carrier going past the artificial islands, and there was a bit of a not skirmish, but there was a bit of words were had there.
I was at the White House when a Chinese aircraft took down an American aircraft over the South China Sea. It was called the EP3 crisis of 2001. It is very easy to see that we could have another of those kinds of incidents. My worry is more about miscalculation. More and more American and Chinese ships and aircraft are coming close to each other. You could have something spark off just simply because a pilot makes a mistake.
Fair enough. Okay, let's get a quick old quotation from Chairman Mao Zedong. I mean, he said, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. You're all familiar with that, but perhaps I'm using it out of context. Kerry, do you think it's in the Communist Party DNA, that expression, and do you think that has any relevance to today's military build-up?
No, I mean, I think the Communist Party is trying to conquer people's hearts, and that's a totally different thing. So its history of violence is probably not a super great thing. At the moment, I think in internal repression, it uses preemptive repression, so very skillful use of the internet and kind of just getting problems before they happen. And I think it's trying to get its message out with things like the Belt and Road and the idea that, you know, there's a China dream for all of us. I think the end problem is that it is an exclusive power. Its values are very exclusive. They exclude us. So even if it wanted a global role, and we wanted to have a global role, it wouldn't be easy for us to find a place with it, and it wouldn't be able to take us on easily. So I think it's a very difficult outcome.
Others might point to the other big leader, Deng Xiaoping's maxim. He said once, hide your strength, bide your time. Jan Bennett, should we be concerned that that is still what's happening and one day China will emerge as the preeminent military power or not?
I don't think so. China does not want to project power beyond the East Asia region. I agree with Dennis on that. That, you know, it doesn't want to be it doesn't want to take on the role that the United States does currently, where it projects power into several theaters. It only wants to be where it is right now.
Okay, final question from all of you, just a yes or no answer. We'll start with you, Dennis. Do you think if they made a Chinese Mount Rushmore that it would be, you know, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and then Xi Jinping? Would he feature?
I think that Xi Jinping would love to see that happen, and I think he's working to get to a point where his legacy is as great as Deng and Mao.
Ian, do you think he's going to be up there one day?
If there was a Chinese Mount Rushmore, I think those three would be up there. I would also add Jiang Zemin.
Kerry?
So Chinese Mount Rushmore, there'd be Mao, 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 and Mao.
Now, a few days ago, hundreds of thousands of American school children took part in the March for Our Lives protest, their response to the mass shooting in February at a school in Florida. Well, their demands include banning assault weapons with high-capacity magazines and raising the age at which rifles can be bought from 18 to 21. Now, Florida has already done this to an extent, but is now being sued by the powerful gun lobby, the NRA. The NRA has a great deal of power at both the state level and in Washington, and is able to stop gun control laws being passed. Here's how.
The NRA is loaded, with revenues of $433 million in 2016 alone. Most of its money comes from two sources: contributions, including from gun makers, and membership fees, 5 million members paying around $40 each. The third biggest source of revenue is selling shooting courses and programs.
From my cold, dead hands.
So what does it do with all that money? Well, most of it goes on NRA initiatives, spending on things like gun safety and training programs, annual meetings, cartoons, making sure they reach the next generation of Americans.
My mom always told me that I should never touch a gun if I find one.
But they also want to reach politicians, and do so very successfully. They give money directly to candidates through their Political Action Committee, known as their Political Victory Fund, funded by ordinary Americans donating a few dollars each. Now, a quick look through their filings show who they backed for Congress in 2016. 1% went to Democrats, 99% of their funding went to Republican candidates. For example, Marco Rubio.
The influence of these groups comes not from money. The influence comes from the millions of people that agree with the agenda.
Well, come on, it is the money too. The NRA gave him $9,900 directly, just $100 shy of the maximum allowed, and separately, all by themselves, they spent $1 million on a campaign in favor of him, and over $2 million trashing his opponent. That's nothing compared to the $30 million to help Donald Trump in 2016. $11 million promoting him, $19 million attacking his opponent.
I will not let you down. Remember that. I will not let you down.
We can't go on like this, my friends.
They picked a winner there. Another powerful weapon in the NRA arsenal is their lobbying group, the Institute for Legislative Action, or ILA. It's headed by the veteran lobbyist Chris Cox.
I'm officially announcing the NRA's endorsement of Donald Trump for president.
Now, the ILA receives millions from corporations including gun makers Smith & Wesson and Ruger. It can't give directly to the candidates, but it can lobby the hell out of them, spending nearly $1 million in the final 3 months of last year alone. So, that's where all the money goes, maintaining its 5 million strong membership, making sure their favorite politicians are elected, and constantly lobbying them once they are. No wonder gun control legislation is so hard to pass.
Once again, the gun lobby is resisting with all its might. Once again, we're battling not just for the safety of our families, but for the soundness of our democracy.
Okay, let's focus on the power of campaigning now and go back to Kylie-Ann. Kylie-Ann, the federal law means that the NRA cannot donate more than $10,000 per election cycle to a candidate. $5,000 for the primaries, $5,000 for the election itself. But you can circumvent that quite easily by spending millions on supporting that candidate or attacking his opponent. Just explain that for our viewers who don't know much about American politics.
Yeah, so American politics in a nutshell, unlike European politics, are all fueled by money and special interest on all sides. But I think something that's unique is the ability of these, political action groups, PACs as they're called frequently, to run ads, that are technically independent of the candidate. So the examples from Marco Rubio and Donald Trump that were heard there. So that rather than giving direct donations to the candidate for their campaign, they run ads that evoke emotions that will then endorse different candidates. And I think that's where a lot of their power is, their ability to make these very well-produced ads that really evoke fear and emotions.
We're going to get into those ads in a moment. Professor Kevin Newell, if I can just ask you, I'm sure you'll argue that the NRA is just playing its part in democracy like every other lobby group.
Yes, I think that's the case. I think I quite like the American system of whereby you are allowed to attack other candidates, and you get a lot more discussion happening around elections. From the United States, I'm sure it appears very, very excessive. I know when I was in the States for an election contest, you got very sick of those adverts. But I think it's a mark of freedom that you are allowed to basically broadcast your views if you want to, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Oh, let's go back to Pradeep for a moment. Pradeep, you heard there Donald Trump saying, you've heard him in other areas as well, saying, you're afraid of the NRA. I don't have that problem. But he was supported with $30 million of their money. I mean, how do you feel when you watch that sort of remark?
It's disheartening. It's disheartening to say that that the fear is still running this country, and then the conversations that we still need to have as survivors is just traumatic. I don't see any survivors coming out and saying, "Hey, let me work for the NRA and have more guns out in the streets."
Okay, Pradeep, thank you for that. Well, Kylie-Ann mentioned the attack ads. Now, a lot of the money does, of course, go into attack ads, and we've pulled together 3 little clips for you. See which one is the spoof ad.
You have a right to protect your home with a firearm, but Liberal politician Jason Kander voted against your right.
Dick Lugar has changed. He's become the only Republican candidate in Indiana with an F rating from the NRA.
And Quist doesn't support our gun rights. He said,
I fully support Second Amendment rights.
But he got caught pushing gun control. He even said we should be forced to register our guns. We just can't trust Rob Quist. Defend freedom. Reject Rob Quist. The NRA Political Victory Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Well, which one of those did we make up? None of them. They were all real ads. Pradeep, if I can come back to you, I'm sorry, but they do try to terrify people.
They do, yeah. And that's the whole part of it, is that we don't understand how psychologically damaging that is. I mean, as of like the last week, the NRA has come out with more ads, sort of just like those, basically saying that we are the biggest victim in the world and are, we're lobbying for those that can't defend themselves and they need a firearm. And that's the type of fear that you hear online all the time.
Now, Vladimir Putin finds himself an isolated figure right now, with Western countries expelling over 100 Russian diplomats in retaliation for the poisoning of a former Russian spy in Britain. But he's often in trouble with the international community, and yet he can always rely on his countrymen for support. He's been in power for the whole of this century, and his re-election in March means he'll be president until 2024. Are his election victories just a sham, or is he genuinely popular? Let's take a look.
New Year's Eve, 1999. The world was counting down to a new millennium. In Moscow, an ailing President Boris Yeltsin decided this was the moment to resign, handing power to his chosen successor, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. As the world celebrated a new millennium, Russia was moving into a new era. Putin won the presidential election just 3 months later in the first round. With a strong record on law and order and a tough approach to Chechnya, he won more than half the vote. His opponents cried foul. When Putin was inaugurated for the first time, the world was a very different place. The class of 2000 included Britain's fresh-faced Prime Minister Tony Blair, Germany's Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, France's smooth Jacques Chirac, and sax-loving Bill Clinton was still US President. They've all long gone, but Putin's still here. In fact, with 18 years in charge, he's been at the top longer than any other G20 leader. In second place and way behind is Angela Merkel, with just 12 years. In the next election in 2004, with the economy stable, a popular Putin won a second term with an even bigger majority. But international observers complained that the state-controlled media again clearly favoured Putin.
Putin controls the media. Russia doesn't have a free media, so by the time they get through whipping everybody up, he can maintain popularity longer than he should.
In 2008, Putin had reached the two-term limit, so Dmitry Medvedev kept his seat warm for the next 4 years and made Putin his prime minister. But there was little doubt who was really in charge, and normal service resumed in 2012, when Putin became president for a third term, which was now extended to 6 years.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin!
The opposition believed the vote was rigged again, and this time thousands of people protested. Dozens were injured and hundreds arrested. Putin's supporters organised a counter-protest which was many times larger, but some said they'd been paid or forced to come. Running again in 2018, his approval rating is still very high, and serious opposition is thin on the ground. There is little doubt he will win. The only question is, by how much?
Well, of course, now we know Putin won the election with over 76% of the vote. His strongest opponent, though, the anti-corruption candidate, Alexei Navalny, was barred from running. Well, in the post-election euphoria, one over-enthusiastic reporter asked Putin if he'll run again in 12 years' time. Even Putin was a little embarrassed.
Вы допускаете ли себе возможность снова возвращения в президентский срок в 2030 году? Ну, если вы не меняете Конституцию.
Послушайте
меня. Понимаете, что еще 6 лет, но...
Но мне кажется, что то, что вы говорите, немножко смешно. Давайте посчитаем. Я что, до 100 лет, что ли, буду сидеть? Нет, нет.
Well, he says that, but who knows? Well, during the Putin show, we were joined by 3 Russia experts, including our editor-at-large, Craig Kapitas, who spent years in Moscow. I began by asking him how Putin keeps on winning.
He controls the playing field. There's a concept in Russia called strach. It means fear. And since the days of the czars, all the Russias have been ruled through fear. He's also made sure that everyone's been fed. They get bread. When Russians don't get bread, that's what triggers revolutions in Russia. It's what happened in 1917. It's what basically happened in 1990 when prices kind of got a bit too high. There's a lot of festering things underneath the surface, but that's essentially why he controls the playing field.
Okay, well,
of course, he's wiped out all of his opponents,
one of
which
the
is
key
an old
things
Bolshevik tactic.
is control of the media. Let's go to Dmitry Ivanov now, who's a vlogger, as I said, in Prague. Controlling the media is so important in these elections.
I guess it has been very important since the day NTV was shut down when they spoke truth about Dubrovka, about the terrorists, about Beslan, about all that things that Putin messed himself into with his FSB friends, KGB friends, doesn't matter. This didn't change a little. So now we're facing that they are looking down the internet, they're trying to control the internet officially and unofficially.
Alexander Alexov, if I can come to you just really quickly, is it also your opinion that it's not a real democracy and that Putin controls the playing field?
Well, I don't understand what it means to control the playing field in Russia, because everyone controls the playing field in every country. Look at any country in Europe, look at America. The press there is also controlled and tightly censored. So this is not the case. I think the reason why Putin is still popular in Russia, although I doubt it's 85%, is because the West is doing everything to make him popular. And when the West attacks him, that pushes his popularity upwards. And when the West invaded, and I say invaded, Ukraine, and organized that coup, that was the end.
Okay, we're going to come to that in a minute. You talked about popularity. Let's go to Dmitry. How popular do you think Putin is? Just his approval rating, what would you guess it to be?
He is not popular at all now, because people already understood that TV is lying. All these fairy tales about Putin's greatness, Putin against the West, Putin overplays Trump, Putin overplays Obama. This is all for people who don't understand anything except that Putin is great. Well, so they live in poverty, and the only hope they have is that sometimes something will happen, just like fairy tale happens.
The thing is, Dmitry, we have the figures, at least a Russian poll shows Putin to be about 81%, and Western polls don't come down much lower than that. Compare him to Donald Trump, guess where he's at? Something like 32%. Craig, I know you're highly skeptical of these things and you don't think they're a decent barometer of anything. Tell us why.
Well, your polling, the object of polling is to basically see if there should be a new leader. And the only poll in the Soviet Union that has ever had any steam was what you read in the newspaper Krasny Vezdya, Red Star. That's the military newspaper every day. I read that every day. And I have seen no indication in Red Star that Putin is anything but the most popular person in Russia. Why is that important? Because no regime change, no revolution in the Soviet Union has ever happened without the backing of the army. It just doesn't happen.
Okay, let's...
So as long as Putin has the army on his side, he controls the playing field.
All right. And finally, who is the mystery leader who got us 2 million views? It's the president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. The man just doesn't care what the rest of the world thinks of him. For example, the International Criminal Court wants to investigate why thousands of people have been killed on the streets in his brutal drugs war. So, a few days ago, he simply announced he was withdrawing the Philippines from the ICC. It's not all that shocking, though, when you consider his utter contempt for anyone who tries to tell him what to do.
Ah, those were the days when a Filipino president could really throw a party for a US president, turning a blind eye to all the corruption. But now it's all a bit difficult.
We do want to start by warning everyone the language from the Philippine leader is graphic.
You idiots, you bullshit. You're a son of a Don't with us. The Republic of the Philippines has a president with a foul mouth. Correct. You can go to hell. Mr. Obama, you can go to hell.
Well, that's what you get for pestering Duterte about human rights.
Clearly, he's a colorful guy.
Maybe Duterte's still angry about the Philippines being a US colony for half a century.
I am a president of a sovereign state. We have long ceased to be a colony.
Well, at least he has a friend in Russia, which recently donated 5,000 Kalashnikovs.
When Russia sells the arms, we sell the arms. You need it, or I will give it to you. You do not attach conditions.
But he saves his warmest remarks for his new best buddy, China.
Our conflict with China is not really, it's more of an imaginary thing. President Xi Jinping. He's really a great guy.
A state visit to China. He's also been to Russia, Japan, Saudi Arabia, even Peru, but no visits to any European country or the United States. As for the United Nations...
United Nations, if you can say one bad thing about me, I can give you 10. Repercussions, I don't give a When you bomb Syria and Iraq, anybody in that stupid body complaining about...
Duterte is also angry with the EU.
Why are you trying to impose on us? Why don't you mind your own business? Why do you have to, with us, goddammit? Why am I saying this, the height of vulgarity? You started it.
Well, they don't call him Duterte Harry for nothing. That is it from the Nexus. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next week. Goodbye.